Today, we are diving into a really fascinating mystery unfolding right now in the markets. We're talking about two absolute giants of industry, obviously both headed up by Elon Musk, mysteriously dropping in tandem. We're going to unpack exactly what's happening behind the scenes here, and I promise you it is way more interesting than just a typical day on Wall Street. So that leads us directly to the core question: why exactly are Musk's empires falling together? On the surface, it might just look like a total coincidence, or maybe just a knee-jerk reaction to some bad news. But as we peel the onion today and really look at the data, you're going to see that this surface-level dip is actually masking a massive, unified structural shift. Let's start with the facts on the ground. As of 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time, Tesla is sitting at $324.35, down just under 1%. SpaceX, meanwhile, took a much harder hit, dropping over 9%, down to $113.94. Now, what makes this pattern so unusual is that earlier in the day, the broader market was actually climbing, yet here we have both of these high-flying companies sitting firmly in the red. So you'd naturally think, okay, they must have had terrible performance, right? Well, actually, no, not at all. SpaceX just reported their Q2 2026 earnings, and they outright beat expectations on both sales and profit. In fact, the stock had already surged nearly 16% in just the 2 trading days right before the report. So what we're looking at is what analysts call a classic sell-the-news event. It's just short-term profit-taking after a really successful rally. It's not a panic over bad numbers. And importantly, if you zoom out a bit, both stocks actually remain up for the week. The hidden link: massive AI infrastructure. Okay, let's really dive into this, because the actual story here is not the daily stock ticker. The real story is the hidden architecture increasingly linking these two companies together. It's all about a monumental escalation in spending. $15.8 billion, that is what SpaceX spent on AI capital expenditures just last quarter. To give you some context on how staggering that is, just a year ago, that number was only $749 million. It's an absolute exponential leap. And to really wrap your head around the physical scale of this investment, you have to look at the power requirements. SpaceX's new AI compute capacity has been pushed to a staggering 1.4 gigawatts. That is literally more than enough power to send Marty McFly back to the future, and it represents a massive jump from the 0.4 gigawatts they had previously. We're talking about entire city levels of power consumption dedicated purely to artificial intelligence. But hey, SpaceX isn't operating in a vacuum here. Over at Tesla, they're making the exact same massive parallel bets on AI infrastructure. Tesla just dropped $5.8 billion on new plants and equipment, which, by the way, is more than double what they spent the prior year. In just the first half of 2026 alone, Tesla says its AI compute capacity more than doubled. So, how are they actually using all this hardware? Well, they're utilizing this massive shared compute power for different, but super complementary AI ambitions. Tesla is channeling its capacity into training its self-driving systems. SpaceX, on the other hand, is developing its own models, sure, but they're also renting out that immense capacity to outside AI labs. It's basically a dual-pronged approach to totally dominating the AI hardware space. The inevitable question: a mega merger. Because they have this deep structural overlap in shared AI infrastructure, a lot of analysts are starting to see a formal merger between Tesla and SpaceX as pretty much inevitable. However, it's definitely not as simple as just signing some paperwork. Rumors have been swirling that Tesla would actually have to sell off its entire China business to clear the path for the SpaceX merger. Why? It really comes down to a massive geopolitical headache. You've got Chinese regulatory roadblocks on one side, and on the other, intense U.S. discomfort with a major defense contractor like SpaceX merging with a company that has such deep intertwined ties to China. Elon Musk even had to recently shoot down this speculation publicly, but the strategic logic behind the rumors is undeniably strong. The China hurdle, a heavy cost. Now, what's really interesting here is what a hypothetical sell-off would actually mean for the business. The crucial takeaway is that giving up this market requires a massive sacrifice. China makes up roughly 20% of Tesla's annual sales. Giving up a fifth of your global revenue, that is a gigantic roadblock for any merger. It's a trade that would carry very real, very heavy costs for their bottom line. And it's not just that China is a big market today, it's a rapidly growing one. Get this, in July of 2026, Tesla sold 93,579 vehicles in China. That's a 38% increase. In fact, July marked Tesla's ninth straight year-over-year sales gain in the country. You absolutely do not just walk away from that kind of compounding growth easily. The big picture. One CEO, one shared bet. So while any actual merger is probably, more than a year away, what we're seeing today with these stock dips is basically just surface noise. It hides a massive unified structural shift. These aren't just two companies moving in tandem on the stock market. They are two companies locking in a massive shared bet on the future of AI hardware. In fact, on the recent earnings call, Elon Musk summed it up perfectly. He stated that outside of China, SpaceX and Tesla are the two best companies on Earth at hardware. Those are his own words, and they really reinforce the reality that these are no longer entirely separate ventures. They're fundamentally intertwined hardware behemoths, sharing infrastructure, strategy, and vision. Which leaves us with this final, honestly kind of mind-blowing thought to ponder. What happens when the two best hardware companies on Earth inevitably collide? Are we basically watching the slow-motion birth of a single, unified AI and hardware empire under one roof? It is a fascinating question, and one we will definitely be keeping our eyes on. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, keep learning.